It began in the shadow of ambition, in the icy heartlands of a nation whose legacy is carved into the chronicles of war and revolution. Russia, a land of vast power and imperial echoes, set out to forge a weapon that would speak of its might, that would extend its reach, that would etch its dominance into the sky or the battlefield. This was not a minor undertaking. It was a national pursuit, a mission crafted with urgency and pride. The halls of design bureaus rang with the sounds of engineers laboring over blueprints and equations, over prototypes and failures. The weapon they created, whatever its shape, whatever its form, was not an afterthought. It was crafted to roar, to dominate, to intimidate. But something unexpected occurred. The thing that was born of fire and steel, born to command, faltered. The very ground that gave it birth could not sustain its purpose. It failed, not once, not in isolated incidents, but repeatedly. Tests fell short. Systems misfired. It showed promise, yes, but always mixed with peril. And the hands that formed it, the minds that had envisioned it, began to lose faith. The pride of the nation became a liability. What was once a symbol of might became a symbol of mishap. The weapon, though born from the heart of Russia, was silently cast aside. Why does such a thing happen? How does a tool crafted by the architects of war, funded by the coffers of a great power, fall short of its promise? How does something designed with the full might of state intention come to nothing on the very soil that gave it life? The answer does not lie only in bolts and engines. It lies deeper, beneath the metal and metrics. There is a mystery at work in the affairs of nations, an unseen rhythm, an ancient law that governs not just weapons, but Russia's failure with its own weapon is not just the tale of a malfunction. It is the tale of a misalignment. The soil was not ready. The time was not appointed. The spirit of the nation was not aligned with the spirit of the tool. And so, like so many stories written in the pages of time, the child that was born was left without a home. But this was not the end of the weapon's journey. Though rejected, though cast out, it lingered in the shadow. Its story had not ended. Only its birthplace had changed. For every rejected purpose, there is a second breath waiting in another land. And so, the weapon began its silent migration. Where it had failed, it would yet flourish, but not in the hands of its creators. Instead, it would cross borders and boundaries, moving from west to east, from cold to heat, from rejection to redemption. But before that journey could begin, there was the moment of abandonment, the moment when the nation that gave it life turned away from it. The papers were closed. The projects paused. The generals looked elsewhere. They sought newer things, different promises, different visions. They moved forward, not knowing that what they rejected would find glory elsewhere. In this lies a secret that is older than any war, older than any empire. That which is birthed in pride may not always fulfill its purpose in pride. That which is created for glory may be refined in rejection. And sometimes the success of a creation is not in its origin, but in its destination. Russia's rejection of its own weapon was not a failure of design alone. It was a marker of destiny. It was a signpost that this weapon was never meant to complete its story in its homeland. The weapon had a greater purpose, but it would need different hands to wield it. The engineers may have thought their work was finished. The generals may have closed the files. But the heavens had not closed the story. For what Russia called a mistake, another nation would call a miracle. There is a pattern here, a divine pattern. The stone that the builders rejected becomes the cornerstone. The one dismissed in one land becomes exalted in another. That which falters in one season finds triumph in the next. And so the first part of the mystery is revealed. A weapon forged in power failed in the land of its birth. Not because it was worthless, but because it was waiting for the right hands, for the right place, for the right time. And though the world saw failure, though critics scoffed and analysts criticized, something unseen was unfolding. A divine transfer, a crossing over, the passing of potential from one nation to another, a sacred migration of purpose. And perhaps it is not just the story of a machine. Perhaps it is the story of your life. For how many have been rejected in the place of their birth? How many have been misunderstood in their beginnings? How many have been labeled failures by those who saw only part of the design? But rejection is not the end of the story. Rejection may be the very path to your rising. For what is dismissed by man may be destined by heaven. What falters in one set of hands may flourish in another. And what is cast out from one kingdom may become the weapon of another. So remember this. The failure of the weapon in Russia was not its final word. It was a comma, not a period. A pause, not a conclusion. Because its journey was not yet over. It had more to do, more to become. And sometimes the journey to greatness begins with rejection. Sometimes the journey to glory begins in the cold, silent shadows of being forgotten. But if the weapon can rise again, so can you. And what was once called failure may yet become the key to victory. It crossed borders in silence, unnoticed by the world's headlines, carrying with it a tale not yet finished. The weapon that once failed in the hands of its creators had now entered a different realm, not merely geographically, but spiritually. It came into a land ancient in wisdom, rising in strength, and hungry for transformation. It was India that received it, not with arrogance, but with vision. Not as a cast-off from a declining hope, but as a seed with potential waiting to bloom. And in this transfer, a mystery unfolded, a divine exchange that would turn rejection into revelation and failure into favor. India did not look at the weapon with the same eyes. Where Russia saw weakness, India saw opportunity. Where Russia saw problems, India saw possibilities. And in this is revealed a deeper truth. Not just about machines, but about people. The weapon, reinterpreted through the eyes of a different culture, a different leadership, a different era, began to come alive. It was as if the very spirit of the machine responded not to its steel, but to the spirit of its bearer. In Russia, the weapon had been treated with rigidity, bound by control, confined within the echo chambers of outdated systems. But in India, it found hands willing to reshape, to understand, to adapt. It was not about copying, it was about co-creating. It was not about using someone else's past, it was about building a future. And the transformation was not merely mechanical. The weapon was modified, redesigned, customized, and reborn, not just in factories, but in purpose. It was integrated into a larger vision, one that saw not only what it was, but what it could be. India did not receive the weapon as it was. India transformed it into what it was meant to be. This is a sacred pattern that repeats across the chronicles of empires and individuals. There are purposes that cannot come alive until they are transplanted. There are gifts that must leave the place of their creation to find the place of their calling. The same is true for you. You may have been forged in fire, raised in discipline, yet misunderstood in your origin. But the hands that hold you are not always the ones that will launch you. Sometimes you must journey across borders, across seasons, across rejections, to find the place where your true purpose will flourish. That is the mystery of the transfer. It is not just geopolitical, it is prophetic. India, in receiving the rejected weapon, stepped into the fulfillment of a hidden destiny. It is no coincidence that a rising nation would be the one to breathe life into what others considered dead. It is no coincidence that the East, long ignored by the dominions of power, is now becoming the furnace of innovation. Just as ancient scriptures spoke of the East bearing light, so too does this moment speak of a rising, a new season, a new order. And the weapon is only a symbol of this deeper awakening. India did not just build a better version. India unlocked a deeper potential. And in that act, the narrative changed. What was once a tale of failure became a prophecy of fulfillment. What was once laughed at in boardrooms became praised in war rooms. The same machine, the same structure, the same code, but with a different spirit, a different will, a different destiny. In Russia, the spirit was to control. In India, the spirit was to create. In Russia, it was used as a projection of might. In India, it was forged as a guardian of sovereignty. This difference is not subtle, it is spiritual. For how a thing is used determines how far it can go. And who holds the instrument determines the song it plays. Now, the weapon, thriving in India, became more than a defense asset. It became a testimony. A message written in fire and steel saying that nothing is final until the Creator says it is. That rejection is not the end, but the beginning of redirect. That failure in one nation can lead to favor in another. That the key to the future may lie not in new invention, but in divine inheritance. And it is in this divine inheritance that India began to rise. Not just through this weapon, but through the posture of how it receives what others reject. That posture is humility and vision. The willingness to take the discarded and ask not, what is this, but what could this become? In that spirit, India began to surpass expectations. The weapon was not only refined, it was field tested, upgraded, and praised by even its critics. Suddenly, the world began to look again. The same weapon, the same blueprint, now operating with precision, agility, power, not in the cold plains of the north, but under the eastern sun. What changed? Not the weapon, the hands, the vision, the spirit. And herein lies another mystery. That which is rejected becomes exalted, not because it changes form, but because it is placed in the hands of those who recognize its purpose. You too may be carrying something that others have overlooked. A dream, a gift, a calling. You may have been told it wouldn't work, that it's flawed, broken, out of time. But perhaps it was never meant to work where it began. Perhaps you are the one meant to take what was dismissed and breathe life into it, to refine it, to reframe it, to redeem it. The weapon's success in India is not a fluke. It is a reflection of something deeper. A rising alignment between purpose and platform. And when the two connect, what once failed will flourish. What once broke down will break through. And what once seemed lost will lead. So now the weapon that was once a footnote in the chronicles of rejection has become a headline in the scrolls of awakening. India, in redeeming what Russia discarded, fulfilled not just a military goal, but a divine mystery. That the rejected stone becomes the foundation. That the eastern sunrise brings light to the western shadows. That purpose delayed is not purpose denied. And that the journey of redemption always passes through hands willing to believe again. In this, let those who have ears hear, let those who have eyes see, that a transfer has taken place. That what failed in one realm can be reborn in another. That destiny is not limited by geography, nor purpose by perception. And that your greatest victories may yet come Not from what you start, but from what you're willing to receive, redeem and restore. Just as India did. Just as the weapon did. Just as you can, there is a pattern, ancient and unbroken, that weaves itself through the story of nations, kingdoms, people, and purpose. It is a pattern not made by human hands, but etched into time itself, a law that unfolds silently behind the stage of history. It is the mystery of transfer, of reversal, of destiny shifting from one to another. What is rejected in one place finds acceptance in another. What falters in one land finds fulfillment in the next. What appears in one land finds fulfillment in the next. What is born in pride may flourish in humility. The story of the weapon that failed in Russia but thrived in India is not a tale of machines alone, nor of policy, nor even of geopolitics. It is a reflection of a divine fingerprint, a spiritual law in operation, hidden beneath the surface of military contracts and diplomatic agreements. It is a living parable of something far greater, the prophetic exchange of purpose. In every age, empires rise believing they will never fall. They create, they innovate, they dominate, and then slowly, silently, their hands lose grip. Not because the tools they fashioned have lost their power, but because the spirit with which they wield them has decayed. The pattern reveals that when an empire misaligns with its purpose, what it has built begins to slip from its hands. What was once a crown becomes a burden. What was once a sign of glory becomes a symbol of dysfunction. Russia, in its ambition, created a weapon. It carried the echoes of its Cold War past, its industrial might, its desire to reclaim former glory. But over time, the weapon began to reflect not the brilliance of its conception, but the brokenness of its context. It did not thrive because the land that birthed it had moved out of alignment with the purpose that could sustain it. And then the transfer began, not with fanfare, not with loud proclamations, but with quiet decisions, with backdoor deals, with subtle shifts. The weapon moved eastward. And with it, a piece of purpose moved too. For purpose is not static, it is dynamic. It seeks the hands and hearts that are ready to steward it. What Russia could no longer steward, India received. And in receiving, it did not merely replicate. It redeemed, it improved. It gave new breath to something that had nearly died in the cold. But this is not an isolated incident. This pattern has been seen before. The Ark of the Covenant, carried by Israel, brought judgment when mishandled, but blessing when honored. The talents given to one servant in ancient parables were taken and given to another who would multiply them. When light is rejected in one place, it begins to shine in another. So too with power, with knowledge, with innovation, and with purpose. It migrates, it flows like a river, seeking fertile soil. And in that flow, we see a spiritual law at work. What India did was not merely strategic, it was prophetic. In embracing what another nation rejected, India stepped into a greater destiny. The weapon became more than a tool of war. It became a vessel of transformation. A symbol that the East is no longer the student of the West, but a rising force, ready to shape the future. India took the pattern of rejection and turned it into a prophecy of resurrection. What was once flawed became flawless. What was once broken became whole. And the nations watched, perhaps unaware of what was truly taking place beneath the surface. This pattern does not stop with nations. It reaches into the lives of people, of communities, of callings. And there are those who have been handed dreams by others, discarded ideas, things labeled too difficult, too broken, too late. But the moment those dreams enter new hands, something begins to shift. The dream awakens. The failure becomes fire. The ruins become a foundation. The transfer is not just geographical, it is spiritual. It is a realignment of purpose with the one ready to carry it. And so India became not just a recipient, but a reformer. It took what was handed over in disrepair and turned it into readiness. This is the calling of every person and every nation who dares to believe that destiny is not determined by others' rejection, but by divine placement. The ones who understand the pattern, who see the mystery, who walk in the rhythm of transfer, they become the restorers of paths, the builders of ancient ruins, the stewards of forgotten treasures. Now the world begins to awaken to what has happened. The very nations that once overlooked India's strength now look again. The same weapon once mocked becomes a standard. The same system once dismissed becomes a benchmark. And yet it is only the beginning, for the pattern is accelerating. That which the West discards, the East redeems. That which the old powers devalue, the rising ones will elevate. The story of this one weapon is a seed, a sign of more to come. And in this is also a warning. For those who hold power but fail to honor purpose, what they possess will be taken. For those who create but grow arrogant, their creation will be transferred. It is not enough to build. One must walk in humility. One must be aligned with purpose. Otherwise, the pattern will unfold once more, and what was once theirs will be handed to another. That which is not cherished will be carried away. But for those who are willing to receive even what others throw away, there is great reward, there is favor, there is fruit. The transfer of purpose brings acceleration. What took years to develop can suddenly flourish in months. What was impossible in one place becomes natural in another. Because when purpose and platform meet, multiplication begins. India now stands as a testimony to that multiplication. The weapon was only the beginning. More is coming, more transfers, more reversals, more redemptions, and it will not be based on wealth or tradition or legacy. It will be based on readiness, on vision, on the spirit with which a thing is handled. The same way India took what failed and turned it into a strength, so too will others rise, not by inventing new things, but by redeeming what others have forsaken. And for those listening, take this to heart. There are things in your life that others have rejected, things you once thought had no future, but the pattern has not ended. If you are willing, if you are ready, you can become the vessel of transfer. You can receive what others left behind and turn it into glory. You can complete what others abandoned. You can become the place where the failed finds fulfillment, where the broken finds beauty, where the forgotten finds purpose. This is the mystery of the pattern, and it is unfolding again in our time. Just as it did with the weapon. Just as it did with India. Just as it can with you. And then came the final revelation. The transformation was not only about a machine, a nation, or a battlefield. It was about a greater pattern unfolding, one that speaks not merely to technology or strategy, but to the heart of destiny itself. The weapon that once failed in Russia, but was resurrected in India, now stood not just as an instrument of power, but as a prophetic witness to the age we are living in. For there comes a time in every generation when what is old gives way to what is rising, when what was central becomes peripheral, and what was rejected becomes the foundation. In this moment, the transfer of purpose is not an isolated event, but a sign that a shift in global order is underway. The very weapon once buried in bureaucratic despair now became the marker of that shift, a physical expression of a spiritual truth, that new hands have been anointed for new purposes. This was not a mere transaction. It was a sacred appointment. India's rise through this weapon is not just a tale of engineering brilliance or national strategy. It is a fulfillment of timing, a convergence of readiness and calling. There are seasons when nations, like people, are prepared by trials, by delays, by watching others rise while they themselves are overlooked. But those seasons are not without purpose. They forge humility. They cultivate hunger. They remove pride. And when the appointed time comes, what could not grow before suddenly begins to flourish. What once failed in the winter of one nation is brought into the spring of another. And so it was with India. The soil had been tilled, the spirit had been prepared, and the weapon, like a seed long dormant, took root and grew. It is not only about military gain, it is about prophetic positioning. The very symbol of failure became the key to rise. That is the mystery at the heart of this story. The weapon itself was never meant to be the end. It was the carrier of a message. And the message is this: what has been overlooked by man may be chosen by heaven. What was thought to be useless may be the very thing appointed to break through. What was created in one age to serve one kingdom may in truth have been destined to serve another. For not all creations fulfill their purpose in the place of their origin. Some must be transplanted to bloom. This weapon became the sign of that truth. And those with eyes to see will understand that it is not just a weapon, it is a mirror. A mirror of what happens when potential is misplaced, and what can happen when that potential is finally placed where it belongs. In the right environment, the same tool that once malfunctioned now performs with excellence. In the right atmosphere, what was once chaos becomes order. And in the right spirit, what was once a liability becomes a legacy. India's spirit in this transformation was not one of conquest, but of calling. It did not seek to simply wield the weapon. It sought to perfect it, to elevate it, to unlock its truest purpose. That is why it worked. That is why the story turned. Because purpose responds not to force, but to alignment. When what is received is treated not as a transaction, but as a trust, then favor begins to flow. The favor that was lifted from one nation can rest upon another. The mantle that was once upon one empire can now be seen resting upon new shoulders. And those who understand this truth will know that this transfer of the weapon is only a sign of the greater transfers to come. The story of this weapon must be understood not only in terms of strategy, but in terms of season. There was a time when Russia's hands were strong, when its reach was long, when its creation carried awe and fear. But that season changed. Power not honored becomes power removed. Gifts not guarded are gifts lost. And when a nation begins to walk in pride or stagnation, what it once birthed begins to wither. Not because the gift is lost, but because it has been reassigned. And reassignment is a divine act. It cannot be undone by committees or reclaimed by force. It belongs now to the one whose hands have been prepared. That is why the world is watching India. Not just for its economy, not just for its growth, but because there is a prophetic wind behind it. A wind that carries old dreams into new hands. A wind that takes what others wasted and turns it into wonder. And this is only the beginning. The weapon was the opening sign. It was the herald of a new chapter. In the days to come, more will be transferred. Ideas, systems, technologies, influence. Not because of luck, not because of politics, but because of alignment. Because there are those who are ready to steward what others have squandered. This applies not only to nations, but to lives. To people who were once cast aside, forgotten, rejected. You may have been passed over. You may have failed where you began. But your beginning does not define your end. If you have remained faithful, if you have stayed open, then you are in position for your own divine reassignment. What was once out of reach may now come into your hands. The very tools that others could not use may now be entrusted to you. Not because you are better, but because you are ready. And readiness is the only requirement. So learn the lesson of the weapon. That which is abandoned may carry the greatest assignment. That which is rejected may hold the greatest reward. That which is dismissed by one empire may be crowned in another. The key is not to seek the thing, it is to become the one who is ready to receive it. India became that one. And now the weapon has become a signpost, a message written in steel and fire, that the age of transfer has begun, that the shift has started, that the mantle is moving. And if this is true of nations, then it is true of you. Be the one who is ready. Be the one who listens when others scoff. Be the one who sees promise where others see problems. And when the weapon arrives, when the opportunity presents itself, do not hesitate. Receive it, refine it, redeem it. For you may be the one chosen to complete the story that someone else abandoned. You may be the one through whom the failure of another becomes the fulfillment of purpose. And the sign that once pointed to defeat will point instead to destiny. This is the final unveiling, the end of one chapter, the beginning of another. A weapon once broken is now whole. A tool once discarded is now decisive. A nation once waiting is now rising. And through it all, a voice speaks, not of metal, but of meaning. Not of war, but of purpose. Not of destruction, but of destiny. The transfer is complete, and the story is not over. It has just begun.